Dhul Qarnayn's mysterious journey. Truth behind Yajuj and Majuj. Expose. The sun burned low in the sky, casting a golden haze across the barren land as Dhul Qarnayn stepped off his horse and looked ahead. The wind whispered over the rocks, carrying with it ancient voices and the smell of dry dust. He stood still for a moment, not moving, not speaking, as if listening to something no one else could. Here behind him, his soldiers waited, quiet and alert. They had followed their leader across valleys, deserts and mountains without question, for they had seen things no ordinary man had ever seen. They had seen cities, built underground gates that sealed entire worlds, and signs in the stars that matched the words written in ancient books. They followed him because he was not a man who ruled with greed. He was a man who ruled with knowledge, justice, and mercy. In front of Dhul Qarnayn stood an old man wrapped in simple cloth, his eyes glowing with something between wisdom and terror. He pointed toward a dark path between two massive mountains, black and jagged like the teeth of a beast, and said in a trembling voice, "They are behind those gates, O great king. They cry at night, they scratch at the walls and scream for freedom." Dhul Qarnayn did not flinch. He simply nodded and asked, "Have they broken through yet?" The old man shook his head. "Not yet, but they grow stronger with each sunset." He turned to his men. "We set camp here tonight at first light. We will go to the wall." That night the camp was filled with quiet movements and quiet prayers. The soldiers prepared their weapons not because they wanted war, but because they feared the unknown. None dared ask questions about what lay behind the mountains. They had heard rumors since they first entered this region, rumors of people who lived like beasts, rumors of giants with eyes like burning coal and breath like fire, rumors of Yajuj and Majuj. In morning came. The sun barely touched the sky, and Dhul Qarnayn was already on his horse. The path to the mountains was narrow and steep, the air thin, and the sky strangely silent, as if even the birds refused to fly near. They climbed slowly, and when they reached the peak they saw Ida, massive wall carved between the mountains. Its stones, black as night and smooth as glass, it stretched so high it disappeared into the clouds, and so wide it seemed to touch the edges of the earth. "This is the wall, Dhul Qarnayn," said the one built to contain them. He dismounted and placed his hand upon it. The stone pulsed faintly, as if it were alive, not with flesh, but with something else, something ancient and eternal. One of his commanders stepped forward. "My lord, how did this wall come to be?" Dhul Qarnayn did not answer right away. He walked along the wall until he found a place where strange markings had been carved into the surface. They were not words, not pictures, but something else. Entirely a language of light that only few could read. Long ago, he began, there were people who cried out for protection. Their lands were being destroyed by beings who came not with ships or weapons, but with chaos. Yajuj and Majuj were not just wild tribes. They were something more. Their rage endless, their hunger unmatched, their minds lost to corruption. They came from the places where the sun never fully rose, from cracks in the earth, and from caves so deep even fire feared to enter. They tore through cities, drank from rivers until they ran dry and left nothing but dust. I was sent to stop them, not with war, but with wisdom. He turned to his men. "We built this wall with iron and molten copper. We shaped it with prayer and sealed it with the will of Ali, and for generations it has held, but something is changing now." He placed his ear against the wall, and all fell silent. Then they heard Ida low growl from the other side. Not like an animal, not like a man, but like both, something that crawled and walked and screamed at the same time. The soldiers stepped back, some whispered prayers, some gripped their swords harder. Dhul Qarnayn stood still, unmoved. "We will go no further today," he said, "but tomorrow we will speak with the people who live near this wall. They may know more than they have told." They returned to camp, and the night passed in restless silence. The next morning a woman approached their tents. Her face was covered, and her voice was soft but steady. "I know what you seek," she said. "I know what stirs behind the wall." She was brought before Dhul Qarnayn, who asked her to speak without fear. She said, "They have found a way to weaken the seal, not with force, but with sound. They sing at night songs that melt rock and bend light. They are not just beasts, they have learned, and learning is more dangerous than Was Dhul Qarnayn. Listen carefully. Then asked her, "Who are you?" She replied, "I am the daughter of the last guardian. My father died protecting the seal." When he realized they had changed, he said, "The earth itself whispered warnings in his dreams. Before he fell, he told me to find you." Took out a scroll from his bag and opened it. Inside was a map with stars drawn in strange shapes and symbols he had not seen before, but he understood their meaning. "The stars are shifting," he said. "Something is awakening across the world." That night, he climbed the mountain again and sat before the wall alone. He closed his eyes and whispered not a prayer, but a message: "I know you are awake. I know you are learning." He opened his eyes and said quietly, "But I am not afraid," and the wall trembled. Dhul Qarnayn's mysterious journey. Truth behind Yajuj and Majuj. The morning air was heavy and still, as if the earth itself held its breath. The wall stood tall and cold against the rising sun, casting a long shadow across the valley below. Zul Qarnayn stood facing it once again, his hand pressed firmly against the stone, as if trying to feel what lived behind it. His men watched from a distance, their eyes filled with questions they dared not speak. Their loyalty to their leader was strong, but fear began to creep through their hearts, for they had never seen Zul Qarnayn so silent, so focused, and so troubled. The woman who had come the night before stood beside him, her eyes never leaving the wall. She spoke softly, saying, "They chant in patterns. The wall responds. The seal is not broken yet, but it bends under their voices, and soon it will not hold." Dhul Qarnayn turned to her. "How do you know this?" She replied, "I have lived near this wall my whole life. My father taught me to listen, not just with ears, but with the bones of the earth." When the chanting began, the animals vanished, the winds turned cold, and the ground trembled. At night, he asked, "What do they want?" She looked down for a moment, then said, "Freedom, not because they seek peace, but because they wish to consume. They see the world as a table and themselves as hunger given shape." Dhul Qarnayn returned to his tent and called his advisors. The map he had unfolded before now glowed faintly as he placed it on the ground. "The stars have shifted again," he said. "What lies behind the wall is not just rising, it is calling, and others have begun to hear." One of his generals stepped forward. "If they break through this wall, the lands behind us will fall in days. There is no army ready for what they bring." Zul Qarnayn nodded and said, "Which is why we will not wait for the wall to fall, we will go beneath it." Soldiers stared in silence. One finally asked, "Beneath it?" The king nodded. "Yes, the wall was built from the outside, but the land behind it is not just a prison. It is a labyrinth with passages old and forgotten. There is one place where the mountain opens to those who know where to look." Woman stepped forward again. "I know that place," she said. "My father took me there once when I was young. He said it was the last door, and it was never meant to be opened." Dhul Qarnayn replied, "Then it is time to open it." They began their journey at dusk, traveling along the edge of the mountain where no path existed, only sharp rock and narrow ledges. The sky above turned from gold to deep blue as the stars began to emerge, guiding them with light too ancient to understand. They climbed for hours in silence, until finally the woman stopped and pointed to a large flat stone pressed against the mountainside. "This is it," she said. "The final door." Dhul Qarnayn examined it closely. The stone was plain, yet it vibrated softly when touched. He pressed both hands against it and whispered a verse. A verse passed down to him by the wise men of old, and slowly the stone began to shift. A narrow passage revealed itself behind the door, carved deep into the rock. The air that escaped from it was cold and smelled of forgotten things. The soldiers lit their torches and stepped inside. The passage was tight and low, forcing even Zul Qarnayn to lower his head. As they walked, the walls were lined with strange symbols, glowing faintly like veins of light, and the silence grew deeper with every step they walked for what felt like hours, until they reached a vast underground hall, the roof so high their torches barely touched it, and in the center stood a pillar carved from a single black stone covered in chains. "This is the anchor," the woman said. "My father told me it binds the mind of the first to fall, the first of Yajuj and Majuj, the one who taught the others to rise." Dhul Qarnayn approached the pillar slowly. Around it were carvings of monstrous shapes with eyes that bled smoke and mouths filled with knives, their forms twisted and shifting even when still. Suddenly, the chains trembled as if something inside the pillar had heard them. Zulkarnayn placed his hand on the surface, and a deep voice entered his mind, not through his ears, but directly through his thoughts. You return. But too late, the voice said. The stars have spoken, and the wall has weakened. The gate will fall, not today, not tomorrow, but soon. And when it does, no ocean, no desert, no sky will stop what comes through. Zulkarnayn remained calm and answered in his mind, you may rise, but you will find the world changed. We are not blind, we are not unprepared. The voice laughed, a sound like breaking bones, and said, you do not understand. We do not seek battle, we seek the end, and the end always comes. He stepped back, breaking the connection. The pillar stood silent once more, but the chains had lost their glow. We need to return now, he said to his soldiers. What lies behind this wall is not a people, it is a storm, and the storm is already moving. Return through the narrow tunnel and reach the surface before sunrise. As the cold wind rushed past them, Zulkarnayn looked at the horizon and saw something that chilled him more than anything else. Smoke rising from the villages beyond the Third Valley, villages that had not seen fire for years, have reached beyond the wall. He whispered, not physically, not yet, but through dreams, through whispers, they have begun to poison the minds of men. He turned to the woman and asked, is there any way to strengthen the seal again? She replied, there is one way, but it requires the light of the first sky and the iron of the deep flame, things that have not been seen since the wall was built. Then we must find them, he said. We ride at dawn again, but this time not to observe, not to listen. We ride to fight what cannot be seen, to stop what has already begun. And the wind carried his words into the darkness as the wall behind them shuddered once more. Hadhul Qarnayn's mysterious journey, truth behind Yajuj and Majuj. Uxpiostidi, the sky was dark, even though the sun had already risen. Thick clouds covered the land, and the wind carried strange voices that seemed to come from the stones themselves. Zulkarnayn rode at the front of his army, his face calm, but his mind racing. The seal on the wall was weakening, and the signs of Yajuj and Majuj's influence had begun to spread far beyond the mountain villagers and nearby lands. Had started to act strangely. Some spoke in tongues no one could understand, some drew symbols in the dirt that matched those on the wall, and others simply vanished at night without a sound. Zulkarnayn knew this was only the beginning. A crack had formed, and it would soon become a flood. The woman who had guided them to the secret door now rode beside him, her face pale but her voice steady. She told him of two ancient elements, the only known forces capable of repairing or strengthening the seal, the light of the first sky and the iron of the deep flame. Light of the first sky is said to exist in the Valley of Echoes, she said, a place where time stands still and the stars shine during the day. It is guarded by the Watchers, beings who were once human but gave up their form to protect what lies within. And the iron, Zulkarnayn asked it, lies beneath the sea of salt in the land of shadows, she answered. It is not mine, but found growing from the bones of the earth where fire never dazed. Zulkarnayn called for his map and spread it across a flat stone in the shade of an old tree. He studied the faded drawings, traced the stars, and matched them with the locations spoken of in ancient scrolls. The Valley of Echoes was west, beyond 3 rivers and a field of glass. The land of shadows was far to the south, past the dunes that moved like waves and swallowed men. We go to the valley first. He decided, if the light still exists, we must find it before the enemy learns to use it. They traveled for days through harsh winds and lands that had forgotten the touch of rain, until finally they reached a place where the air grew heavy and sound itself became strange. Every footstep echoed like thunder, and every whisper repeated itself again and again until it no longer sounded human. This is the Valley of Echoes, the woman said. Soldiers moved carefully. The echoes around them grew louder with every step, and soon they could no longer tell which voice was theirs and which came from the valley itself. Zulkarnayn ordered the army to halt. Only he, the woman, and 2 trusted warriors would go further as they moved deeper into the valley. The land changed, the rocks began to shine faintly, and the air shimmered with light that danced like water. Then ahead of them appeared a great arch carved from silver stone. It pulsed with light, and behind it stood 3 tall figures draped in robes made of starlight, their faces hidden. "You seek the light," said one of them without moving their lips. Zulkarnayn nodded. "I seek it to stop what stirs behind the wall." The watchers looked at each other, then one raised its hand, and from the ground rose a crystal glowing with a pure white flame. "This is the light of the first sky," the voice said. "It is not a weapon. It is a mirror. If your heart is impure, it will destroy you. If you carry hatred, it will consume you. Only those with clear purpose and clean soul may hold it." Zulkarnayn stepped forward and reached out. As his hand touched the crystal, it flared with brilliance, but did not burn. The watchers bowed slightly and stepped aside. "You are worthy," they said. "May the light protect you, but beware, it reveals not just what is outside, but what hides within." They returned to the army, the crystal wrapped in cloth that shimmered like air, and immediately the land around them began to change. The wind softened, the echoes faded, and the birds returned to the trees. With the light in hand, they turned south for the Sea of Salt. Their path led them through deserts where the sand seemed to whisper curses, and creatures with no names followed their shadows. But Dhul Qarnayn pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the seal must be strengthened before it was. 2 late days passed, and finally they stood before the Sea of Salt, a vast land where no plant grew and no bird flew. The ground was white and hard and cracked like broken glass, and in the center was a deep hole glowing with red light. "That is where we must go," the woman said. "The iron of the deep flame grows only there, but no one who has entered has ever returned." Zulkarnayn looked at his men and said, "We do not have the luxury of fear. We go together, and we return together." They descended into the hole where the air burned and the walls bled heat. The deeper they went, the darker it became, until even the torches began to flicker. Then they saw it, veins of metal glowing with an inner fire pulsing like a heartbeat buried in the stone. "This is it," whispered one of the soldiers. "The iron of the deep flame." Zulkarnayn placed his hand on it, and it moved not away from him, but toward him, wrapping gently around his fingers and rising. Like a serpent, it understood his need, and it responded to his command, forming itself into a blade, a ring, and a seal. With both the light and the iron in their possession, they climbed back to the surface, and the land itself seemed to sigh with relief. The wind turned cool, the sky cleared, and the sun rose higher than it had in weeks. But the peace did not last that night. As they set camp near a river, a scream echoed from the distance, followed by another, and then another. The soldiers stood alert, weapons drawn. The sound was coming from the direction of the wall. A rider approached, fast and wild, his clothes torn and his face pale. "They have begun," he shouted. "The wall, it is cracked. They are not through yet. But the stone bleeds, and the voices, they scream all night." Zulkarnayn stood without a word. He opened the cloth and held the crystal high. Its light shot into the sky, and for a moment, all sounds stopped. Even the wind seemed to hold still. "Tomorrow we ride for the wall," he said. "But this time we do not go to defend, we go to end this." The army prepared through the night, sharpening swords, reforging armor, and whispering verses from the old books. Dhul Qarnayn walked among them, speaking words of courage and strength, for he knew what they would face next was not just a battle, but a test of soul and fate. And as the sun rose once more, they rode not with fear, but with fire in their hearts and the light of the first sky in their hands. Qarnayn's mysterious journey. Truth behind Yajuj and Majuj. Expose. The sky burned red, as if the heavens themselves were warning what was to come. The earth trembled beneath the hooves of the horses, and a strange silence hung in the air as Dhul Qarnayn and his army approached the great wall once more. The massive structure, once glowing with sacred energy, now stood cracked and scarred. Its black stones, no longer smooth, but bleeding streaks of molten dust that shimmered with dark fire. Zulkarnayn dismounted and walked alone toward the wall. He held the light of the first sky in his right hand and the iron of the deep flame in his left. The soldiers stayed behind, forming a wide circle around the base of the mountain, chanting verses of strength and unity as the wind began to rise from the broken center of the wall came. A sound not heard in any world for thousands of years. It was not a voice, not a growl, not a scream. It was something beyond language, something that reached deep into the soul and pulled at the threads of hope. A low, pulsing sound like the earth itself crying in pain. "They are waking," said the woman standing beside Dhul Qarnayn, her voice steady but low. "They know you have returned, and they are afraid." He nodded and placed the crystal light into a carved hole near the heart of the wall. Instantly, the wall pulsed again, but this time with a new energy. White threads of light began to creep across the cracks, moving like veins seeking the broken places. The light was healing, but it was not enough. "Bring the iron," he commanded, and his soldiers carried forward the iron, shaped into a seal as wide as a shield and burning with deep crimson light. It hummed as they approached the wall, vibrating with energy that could not be. Zul Qarnayn placed the iron seal against the center of the wall where the largest crack had formed, and it sank into the stone as if melting into its core. Then he stepped back and raised both hands toward the sky. "O Lord of all that walks, crawls, and breathes," he said, "give us strength, not for war, but for peace. Give us protection, not for comfort, but for duty. Give us light, not for pride, but for truth." And the sky answered. A beam of light descended from above, striking the top of the wall and spreading across the sky in a line that split the clouds. The earth shook again, but this time it was not from fear. It was from power, righteous and controlled and mighty. The wall screamed as the crack began to close slowly, painfully. The screams from behind grew louder, not in rage but in panic. The voices of Yajuj and Majuj cried out, not in victory but in despair. They had seen the light, they had felt the iron, and they knew it was stronger than them. But the wall did not close fully. Something blocked it. A shadow formed in the center of the crack. A figure, not man, not beast, with eyes like fire and a body made of smoke and ash. It stepped forward, pressing against the seal, its arms long and sharp, its mouth open but filled with no sound. "You cannot stop what is begun," it said, "not with light, not with flame. We have already touched the hearts of men. We have planted our seeds, and they will grow in silence until the world is ours." Dhul Qarnayn stepped forward and said, "You do not understand. The hearts of men may be weak, but they are not yours to keep. Every soul is born with choice and the will to rise." The figure laughed a laugh that bent the air and cracked the stones. "You are a fool, king. You seal the gate today, but tomorrow another will open. There's always another wall, always another crack." He raised the crystal light, and the figure shrieked, its body twisting and burning under the pure light. It tried to retreat, but the iron seal glowed brighter and brighter until the figure burst into pieces that scattered into ash and disappeared into the wind. Wall groaned once more, and the final crack began to close. The light of the first sky filled every corner, and the iron pulsed like a beating heart. The seal was complete. The screams were gone. The wind calmed, and silence fell. Zul Qarnayn collapsed to his knees, his hands burned and trembling. The woman ran to him, helping him stand. He looked at her and said, "It is done for now." He turned to his army and raised his voice. "The wall holds again, not because of strength, but because of unity, not because of weapons, but because of belief. The threat is not over. It never is, but we have proven that light still defeats darkness, and truth still defeats fear." The soldiers cheered not with joy, but with pride. They had stood at the edge of the end and turned it back. Zul Qarnayn stayed near the wall for many days, watching, listening, making sure no whisper returned. And finally he placed a new stone at the center of the seal, a stone carved with one line: "This wall is not just of iron and stone. It is of prayer and purpose and the will of those who never surrender." Then he mounted his horse and rode away into the sunrise, his army behind him, the woman at his side. The world safe once more, but forever changed. And though the wall stood tall and silent again, every man, woman, and child who lived near it knew the truth. Yajuj and Majuj had spoken, and they would speak again. But as long as there were hearts willing to stand and fight, the world would not fall the end.